Hello, I'm Emily Wright, Tech Editor and Head of Special Projects of Estates Gazette. And in case the accent didn't give it away, I'm based here in the UK, I'm here in London. And I'm joined today by Michael Phillips, President of Jamestown. And it's so exciting to see you. Again, the last time I saw you was in Paris. That seems like, you know, a million miles away, meeting up in, you know, places that neither of us are from. How have you been?
Very well, nice to see you again.
And I'm going to sort of get you to give us just a little bit of an overview of the company, just because I know we've got an international audience, just so everybody knows a little bit more about it. But before we do that, I want to find out how you are, how you've been doing. I'm amazed to see that you're in an actual real life office. Here in London, we're still a bit behind on that front, so it's very novel to see. So tell me about it. How's it been returning to the office? And you've been traveling as well, haven't you?
Yeah, a wee bit. So yes, we've been in the office a few weeks now, sort of on a slow back to work in New York, sort of following guidelines. And some of our other offices around the country and in Europe are also back, and others are waiting for some guidance to go back. But, you know, it's been challenging for everyone the last 120 days. But I would say that certainly, you know, I spent the first 3 weeks of June in Europe, which was very enlightening about how sort of a variety of countries are dealing with reopening. And you know, we saw sort of heartened to see teams in Cologne and Milan and in Amsterdam and Paris and all of the ways they were sort of following guidelines and how they all varied a little bit. But for the most part, I think Europe is a bit of a brighter story than the US right now in terms of where we are in the process.
And what's the vibe like in offices or in the office? I mean, that's something that has been a debate kind of since this all started. You know, how do we return? How do we return safely? It's something that certainly we're still trying to work out here in the UK and in London, where the problem is not so much the offices, it's the commuting, and how do we safely achieve that? So how have you found it?
Well, in New York, we've given people bikes, you know, or travel vouchers and that sort of thing. And we found, I mean, obviously the transportation is a little challenging and in more urban markets. You know, I think that this life we're living on Zoom is works for maintaining business on a daily basis. I think what it misses is human contact and really the opportunity to be innovative and to share ideas and to see what sticks and to sort of test and iterate quickly. And so I think what we found as our offices have gone back is all of a sudden things that were sort of on the slow boat, you know, that weren't moving very fast, all of a sudden got solved very efficiently. And, you know, we're just big believers that, you know, teams need to be together as much as they can, you know, and I think certainly everyone needs to engage at the level of sort of health and safety they feel comfortable with. But I think it's you know, it's certainly for us, it's been good to be back.
Well, I'm glad it's good to be back, and I look forward to being in a similar position soon, I hope. So I wanted to talk to you obviously about the business, and I know from previous conversations that we've had that innovation has been really high up on your agenda for a very long time, not in isolation obviously, but looking at innovation hubs, but also, you know, an innovative business model. But before we delve into that, just in case there's anybody who's tuned in who needs to know a little bit more about the business, could you just give me a bit of an overview?
Sure. So we're a 37-year-old company with assets in North America, South America, and continental Europe. We have about 12 billion in assets under management, just a little bit shy of that, and we invest in several sectors and asset types: office, retail, residential, a little bit of logistics. But our specialty, as you called out, was really creating what we would call these 24-hour sort of innovation hubs, which are mixed use environments where we intentionally curate tendencies that can work B2B and B2C in whatever their specialty is, whether it's, you know, coding or technology or design, industrial design and product manufacturing, and goods and services and consulting. So that's been gratifying over the last cycle.
Absolutely. I mean, and from speaking to you previously, I know it's also been very effective. And am I right? I'll just, check the figures with you as we go. But am I right in thinking that by focusing, in part anyway, on innovation hubs, you sort of pivoted the business and grew assets under management from $2.8 billion to $11.8 billion, just under that 12 billion you mentioned?
Yes, I think that there were some other products in there as well, but that was a big piece of it. Absolutely.
It's certainly, a smart move. And I want to talk a bit more actually about pivoting, because that is something that businesses before the pandemic were realizing more and more was going to be pretty crucial in terms of making sure that, responding to market conditions. And if anything has, put a spotlight on the need to be able to be nimble, think fast and pivot, it's the situation we're currently in. So could you talk to me a little bit more about that strategy, both in terms of how you applied it back then and how you're applying it going forward and how it's helped you in this current climate?
I think our business is very data driven, as they all are, whether it was, analog data gathering as we all did before, or what's become sort of more in the vanguard of sort of data collection digitally. But creating a pool of data, making a decision about a thesis in business, and then executing on it is something that we all want to do well, and we all want to be nimble at. And I think for us, understanding that all parts of the real estate space have time and places in their cycle that they work better than others. And so for us, it was, really focusing on what vertically integrated meant to begin with, and coming out of the 2008 downturn, and developing a real skill base in all of the areas of value creation that we thought could create synergies and allow us to execute quickly. And then consequently, that included fund structures and the way we raised money, the way we communicated with our investors. And then in the last sort of 5 years in real estate tech, how do we make strategic investments, test and iterate with partners around technologies, deploy it in our portfolio, provide feedback, and get critical mass among other peers in our space so it can be more widely adopted.
And I know that when it comes to innovation and being nimble, data and insight is just one of what is sort of a four-pronged attack. So do you want to give me a bit more information?
Sure. So, we start with, data and insights, collecting the data, understand what people want, then, work on an incubation plan, building spaces and services and helping people get into business or grow their businesses in our spaces. And then, creative capital. What does it mean to have either capital investment structures that helps serve that model, or leasing structures that are flexible to deal with that? And then finally, kind of creating a culture around innovation where we really, through crowdsourcing ideas or having, sort of mashups with our employees and friends, what does it mean to be kind of constantly looking for new ideas to test and iterate? And, that has seemed to be, a nice sort of 4-pillar approach for us.
4 excellent pillars. I'm not, there's not one in particular that stands out, but as it was the last one you mentioned, it's stuck in my head, which is this mashup of ideas and the crowdsourcing. How have you found the response to that? And have you been able to kind of get everybody sort of behind that and all contributing?
Sure. Yeah. We have 480 employees in company-wide, and across all disciplines, whether they're facilities folks or accounting people or asset managers or acquisitions folks. So to create a culture within the company that everyone, no matter what their discipline or their education or their rank, feels free to contribute ideas or thoughts or trends or things they see has been really gratifying. And we run a competition every month. We recognize people. And we've expanded it outside as well in different formats with friends and sort of what I would call friends and family. And that has been really gratifying. And we really committed ourselves to deploying those ideas and having a measurable result and feeding that back to the group as part of the process.
And in terms of that four-pronged approach and specifically the data and insights, but I know it all plays into sort of the same thing, it's kind of all about understanding what people want. And that is something which is so important. And you'd think that that was kind of top of the list of priorities for real estate right from day one. But I think perhaps maybe it hasn't, and B, of course, what people want has changed and is always changing. So how do you make sure that you're always on top of that? And again, that's all part of this, approach of being really nimble.
Well, some of it is just environmental, being attuned to what trends are happening. I'm a huge social media fan. I'm addicted to Instagram, so which is probably not so popular to say. But in addition, we've created dashboards that are in both the retail space and in the office and residential space that allow us to really look at people's spending patterns, their habits, their affinities, what other things they're doing, what other zip codes and cities are like the zip codes that we own buildings in. And that's really allowed us a certain amount of kind of insight about where we see aspirations developing or habits changing.
And through that, has there been anything that has been very surprising to you where you've thought, God, if we didn't have this in place, there's no way we would ever have known that?
Sure. So, I think a few years ago, the downward pressure on retail rents because of online growth, the feedback we were getting from retailers was they wanted to pay less rent because they were having more sales outside the store. But what we learned, really interestingly, we learned it from a Sephora real estate rep, is when we talked to her about where she was going to open a store, she pulled up her iPhone and on it, she did a heat map of where their online business was good. And she said, yes, I'll open a store in this geographic area. And what we learned at that point is that retailers open bricks and mortar where they have online strength, and that there's a symbiosis between those two things. And that led to us sort of looking at either capturing online sales as a trade area or just having strong rents that support the fact that we have knowledge that the trade area is strong. So I would say that was essential to the retail space, and particularly now as we talk about restarting, where retailers like J.Crew, for example, are coming out of bankruptcy. Knowing how productive their stores are let you know kind of how to deal with retailers as they're restructuring.
And your support as well, the support that you offer to small businesses is something which is obviously very, very important to you. And could you talk to me a bit more about that side of things? Because that's on the bricks and mortar side, it's on the tech side, and you've obviously brought those two together and kind of offer sort of that incubator style aspect of the business as well.
Well, some people would say they're frustrated architects, or they're frustrated, what have you. I'm a frustrated architect, retailer, restaurateur, fashion merchant. So to me, the idea that we could be in a position to sort of join hands with our tenants and to help them grow before all of this was really compelling. Whether it's our food and beverage specialists, people that are actually talent on our team, or whether it's technology. So creating a portal to help people learn how to maximize their penetration in marketing on social media, or how to access grants and funding mechanisms that help them grow their business. That was another place of aggregation for us that we thought technology and human capital coming together created a better result.
And I'm quite interested to hear then about how you see yourselves in the market compared to everybody else, basically, like what makes you different. I mean, we're going through some of the ways that you approach business. We're talking about some of the things that you've done, which, sort of play into that kind of frustrated architect, retailer side to you. So where do you see yourselves in the market in terms of what you're offering and what others are offering?
Well, I think for us, in the US, we had a company here in the 70s called the Rouse Company, which was quite famous for doing these kind of very public-private partnerships of creating experience retail. And what I really liked about that is they had an idea for a coffee shop and they designed a coffee shop, and that became a business. And that business grew out of their real estate. And so we see ourselves a bit as an ideation company, a bit as an industrial design company, but at the same time, we see ourselves, squarely as an institutional real estate manager. But all of these things are on the side, being vertically integrated, whether it's having a new ventures technology incubation fund, or it's, having talent to run that investing platform and deployment platform, are about building community. And only through having strong communities and having integrated environments, whether it's housing, housing, office, retail, logistics, that ecosystem is and creating community partners in the nonprofit space, whether it's in food and nutrition with the James Beard Foundation, or some of the other partners, community partners for community gardens and wellness in schools and that sort of thing, are all at their root about creating a healthy ecosystem in the community. And through that, our investors, of which we have a great sense of fiduciary obligation, have what we think are better returns. And so where do we stand in the marketplace? There's people who do what we do, lots of talented people who do what we do. But at the same time, I think everybody has their own individual style and their own individual way of doing it. And for us, we're not historically, we're very much we believe in kind of aspirational and inclusive environments, not really the old model, which was sort of exclusivity. We want to kind of create a place where everybody can find something that relates to their true north and helps them feel nourished and satisfied.
And let's talk about that, because I think, among other things, the situation that we've all collectively found ourselves in recently has done more to focus everyone's attention on inclusive communities in one go than I've seen for a very long time. It put everybody in the same boat. It leveled everybody, not obviously completely, because some people found themselves, isolating or distancing in very different situations to others. But everybody felt that sense of, having a level of control, and, all having this sort of similar common enemy in obviously the virus. And it's been a very difficult time, a very challenging time, and nobody would wish for this path to success, as I've said before, and I'll say again. But it has certainly highlighted some issues that I think were really needed to be highlighted. So in terms of that inclusive communities aspect of it, how do you see the current situation having kind of, what I personally think, fueling that focus on how important it is to make sure that we're creating inclusive environments?
Sure. I mean, I think, the COVID, the outcome of shutting the world down from COVID-19 had, a sort of forced requirement that we all spend a lot more time with ourselves individually and examine what's true for us. And also some sort of silver linings were that many of us got to spend more time with our families, or we cooked more. There's certainly lots of businesses that have struggled through this. There's also businesses that have excelled. Digital learning companies have excelled, and grocery and food suppliers and home furnishings vendors, people have sort of spent money in different ways. But I think what at least we saw we've seen in the US in particular is that finding a place, creating places for us, whether it's, One Times Square in the center of Times Square, where most of the, great wins and losses in our history as Americans have played out on that stage, or at Pond City Market or Chelsea Market, finding a place for people to have a speaker's corner, to communicate what their values are, to share their frustrations, and to come together and to be a place for convening, whether it's virtual or in person, is really essential. And we like to think that we create kind of main streets for people in what we do. And it requires us to really seek out a curated group of people that are diverse and different from one another and come from many racial backgrounds and many ethnicities and nationalities. And that's what makes what we do, particularly with a food focus, really interesting and compelling.
Thank you very much. Brilliant answer there. You mentioned something else earlier that I wanted to touch on. You were talking about various aspects of the business, and one of the things that you were mentioning was, you've got certain aspects of it and you need to find the right talent to run whatever it might be. And that's another interesting one, when these sort of change in directions happen or companies pivot, you do often find that you need a different skill set. You're looking for a different kind of set of people to come and help, make sure that whatever it is you want to achieve can happen. So how are you finding that? Because I know that it's a common issue for the real estate sector, saying, well, where do we look for these people that we haven't necessarily, had in our business before?
Well, I think also the real estate industry tends to rely very heavily on finance majors and finance degrees. And we found that placemaking in community requires finance, but that's not the most important skill. Understanding many other things are important skills. Hospitality, many of our people come out of the hospitality space, whether it's food and beverage or it's sort of rooms and customer management and kind of creating that kind of engagement, or technology. We were very early in hiring a sort of dedicated technology person inside our company who didn't sit in the IT department. She sits in the core real estate business, and that was a very different experience, I think. So, my partners have always sort of said, whenever we said we want this, and this is a left turn from our core business, but it can be accretive and drawing something in. So unanimously, we all said, yes, let's do that. And so, we're very happy to hire people across the education spectrum, across the talent spectrum. And we think that creating places requires, a many skill sets. And so our best hiring comes from word of mouth, candidly. We certainly use recruiters, but it comes from who our people know and who they want to work with.
Thank you very much. Before I ask you for a final message, which I've been doing, and every phone call I've had actually through this entire sort of crisis that we've been through, because it's sort of kind of really crystallizes people's thoughts. So ever since it started, I've always started the calls or meetings by saying, how are you doing? And finishing the calls and meetings by saying, what's your message? But before I do that, I know that you guys have been behind, is it a $50 million restart program for small businesses to reopen post-COVID? It seems an obvious question to ask you where the drive for that came from, but could you just tell me a bit more about that? Because that's fantastic, and I think that it's so important that people can see the real estate sector kind of stepping up and helping.
Sure. So, one of the benefits of being, I would say an international company. I wouldn't say we're a global company, but we're an international company across jurisdictions, is that we saw the impact very early in Milan, certainly in Wuhan and in Central Asia, but then in Milan and then in Cologne, where we have an office, were early places that it was traveling. And so late January, actually, we started developing this portal. And we deployed the portal at the beginning of March, and then in addition, as a toolkit for tenants. But it was also really clear that the fear of how people restart their businesses with unknowns and the level of what's essential to keep community intact. And we're facing it every day, whether it's with outdoor seating or with pickup and delivery or with limited hours of operation, that they all needed once again to kind of have some help. And that help from so we devised this $50 million fund. And some of those dollars are loans, some of those dollars are infrastructure improvements in their space to retrofit to make it different. But also some of those dollars are to hire third-party marketing people to help them, figure out how to stay in contact with their customer when they can't actually touch them. So we just, we said this is important, and we announced it, very early in the process, and we felt like it was important. Again, our job is to partner. We're in partnership with these tenants, and so if not now, when? And so that's where that came from.
Brilliant. Well, an amazing effort and great foresight as well. So I said I was going to ask you for a final thought, and I will. And I even gave you a bit of warning that I was going to ask. So if you were going to leave, and then asked you another question, so you had no time to think about it.
Right.
Yeah. So if you were going to leave the audience with one final thought today, something that either we've discussed that you want to reiterate, or something that we haven't discussed that you think is really important, what would that message be?
Yeah, I mean, clearly real estate tech was sort of late cycle kind of development. Our industry was not very focused on innovation. It was, sort of hundreds of years have gone into real estate management and development. But I think it's a very dynamic, interesting field with lots of players. And, somebody said to me, do you think, innovation will happen from individuals or from larger companies? And, my answer was both. I think you need small companies and you need people to take a risk. You also need bigger companies to say, we're going to test and iterate this technology. And as part of that, we created this Jamestown Invest direct-to-consumer investment fund distributed over social media. And it's a small fund and it's slow in going, but it essentially is going direct to the consumer, which we think is a key part of where the world is going in terms of investment. Connecting investors with managers who have shared sense of values and create an additional return than just financial, but are accessible through your PDA. And so the reason I think that's relevant is because if we're not doing that and people like us aren't doing that, and really being willing to test, iterate, and accept some amount of failure, then the industry won't move forward. Real estate industry is an industry that accepts a very low percentage of failure, 4 or 5%. It's very institutional. But the technology industry accepts almost 90% failure. To get to a good idea, you have to keep working at it. And so I guess as a parting thought, I'd say we need everyone to sign on to that sort of social contract to get the best development and adoption of technology.
An excellent final thought. Thank you very much. And thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you as well for joining from an office, because it is probably the first time I've actually seen a backdrop which isn't someone's living room or house, and it's been really lovely to get an insight into people's lives. But it's encouraging and reassuring to see somebody, particularly somebody in a big city like New York, back in the office, and it gives me a bit of hope that some semblance of normality is not too far in the future. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks very much, as always. Enjoy your summer and the conference.
Thank you.